Hi everyone, this is day 36 of my communication practice, and during this course, I've seen a lot of videos. I took a gap of one day yesterday because I was too tired, and I reached home around 12 in the night. So I was not able to make the videos because I was exhausted from the work at my job, the new job I joined as a consultant. So now I understand why consulting is one of the most hated jobs, and why people don't find it fulfilling. So I had this itch of joining a consulting firm, and that's why I'm doing this sort of work. So I'll see how it goes. But yeah, I understand the point of view of people who want to actually quit consulting and join some other fulfilling career. So, on the day 36, we'll discuss about the final parts of the part B of the book, which is talking about the logotherapy, and how it is different from psychotherapy. And then probably the next videos will be basically on the postscript of the book, which calls for the case for a tragic optimism, and then they'll talk about the other stuff. I don't know what they will talk about, but this is after, this part came in the after editions of the book. This was not part of the first edition of the book. So I'll just start by reading the last few pages of the part B of the book. Critique of pan-determinism. Psychoanalysis has been often blamed for its so-called pansexualism. I, for one, doubt whether this reproach has ever been legitimate. However, there is something which seems to me to be an even more erroneous and dangerous assumption, namely that which I call pandeterminism. That by that I mean the view of a man which disregards his capacity to take a stand towards any condition whatsoever. Man is not fully conditioned and determined, but rather determines himself whether he goes to into the conditions or stand up to them. In other words, man is ultimately self determining. Man does not simply exist, but always decides what his existence will be, what will he will become in the next moment. By the same token, every human being has the freedom to change at any instant. Therefore, we can predict his future not only with the large framework of a statistical survey referring to a whole group. The individual personality, however, remains essentially unpredictable, the basis for logical or sociological conditions. Yet, one of the main features of a human existence is the capacity to rise above such conditions, to grow beyond them. Man is capable of changing the world for better if possible, and of changing himself for the better if necessary. Let me cite the case of Dr. J. He was the only man I ever encountered in my whole life whom I would dare to call a Mephistophelan being, a satanic figure. At that time, he was generally called the mass murderer of Stinghof, the large mental hospital in Vienna. When the Nazis started their euthanasia program, he held all the strings in his hands and was so fanatic in the job assigned to him that he tried not to let one single psychotic individual escape the gas chamber. After the war, when I came back from Vienna, I asked what happened to Dr. J. He had been imprisoned by the Russians in one of the isolation chamber of Steinhof, they told me. Next day, however, the door of his cell stood open and Dr. J was never seen again. Later, I was convinced that, like others, he had, with the help of his comrades, made his way to South America. More recently, moreover, however, I was consulted by a former Austrian diplomat who had been imprisoned behind the Iron Curtain for many years, first in Siberia and then in the famous Lubyanka prison in Moscow. When I was examining him neurologically, he suddenly asked me whether I happened to know Dr. J. After my affirmative reply, he continued, I made his acquaintance in Lubyanka. There he died at about the age of 40 from cancer of the urinary bladder. Before he died, however, he showed himself to be the best comrade you can imagine. He gave consolation to everybody. He lived up to the highest conceivable moral standard. He was the best friend I ever met during my long years in prison. This is the story of Dr. J, the mass murderer of Steinhoff. How can we dare to predict the behavior of a man? We may predict the movement of a machine, of an automation, more than this. We may even try to predict the mechanism or dynamism of the human psyche as well, but man is more than psyche. Freedom, however, is not the last word. Freedom is only part of the story and half truth. Freedom is but the negative aspect of the whole phenomena, which whose positive aspect is responsibleness. In fact, freedom is in danger of degenerating into mere arbitrariness unless it is lived in terms of responsibleness. That is why I recommend the Statue of Liberty on the East Coast be supplemented by a Statue of Responsibility on the West Coast. The psychiatric credo. There is nothing conceivable which would so condition a man as to leave him without the slightest freedom. Therefore, as residue of freedom, however limited it may be, is left to man is neurotic and even psychotic cases. Indeed, the innermost core of the patient's personality is not even touched by a psychosis. An incurable, an incurably psychotic individual may lose his usefulness but yet retain the dignity of a human being. This is my psychiatric credo. Without it, I should not think it worthwhile to be a psychiatrist. For whose sake? Just for the sake of a damaged brain machine which cannot be repaired? If the patient were not definitely more, euthanasia would be justified. Psychiatry rehumanized. For too long a time, for a half century, in fact, psychiatry tried to interpret the human mind merely as a mechanism, and consequently, the therapy of a mental disease merely in terms of a technique. I believe this dream has been dreamt out. What now begins to loom on the horizon are not the sketches of psychologized medicine, but rather those of a humanized psychiatry. A doctor, however, who would still interpret his own role mainly as that of a technician, would confess that he sees in his patient as that of a technician would confess that he sees in his patient nothing more than a machine instead of seeing the human being behind the disease. A human being is not one thing among others. Things determine each other, but man is ultimately self determining. What he becomes within the limits of endowment and environment, he has made out of himself. In the concentration camps, for example, in this live-in laboratory on this testing ground, we watched and witnessed some of our comrades behave like swine while others behave like saints. Man has both potentialities within himself. Which one is actualized depends on decisions but not on conditions. Our generation is realistic, for we have come to know a man he really is. After all, man is that being who invented the gas chambers of Auschwitz. However, he is also that being who entered those gas chambers upright with the Lord's Prayer on or the Shema Israel on his lips. So here, doctor also talked about a person called Dr. J, who was basically one of the cruelest people in the camp, and he gassed many people who were in the Vienna psychiatry mental hospital, probably polytechnic. And after Russians took over the camps, he was imprisoned, and later he fled, and then he was again imprisoned in Lubyanka or somewhere, where he became one of the best comrades and he helped a lot of folks. So you can see a 360 degree turn of the life, and later he died because of a cancer at the age of 40. So you understand, like, man can behave differently at a different moment. And the author basically is concluding that it is not based out of conditions and atmosphere, but rather it's a function of the choices he makes in those circumstances. And the last few lines are very powerful, like man is that being who invented those gas chambers where people were being killed, and man is also the person who is entering those gas chambers with dignity, with Lord's Prayer, So you can see the duality of human nature, or we say the paradox of the human nature. So there is a quite a range where human can like oscillate between. So yeah, that was part B of the book called Man's Search for Meaning, and now I think we can go to the postscript of the book, and it is also a few pages. Probably I'll keep it separate for my next few videos, and I think there are about 10 odd pages which are left. So we'll cover that in the next video. This is the day 36 of my communication practice, and I think I have improved. I do have an interview at 22nd of April. I am not sure whether I have developed. I think my communication is clear. Communication is like crystal clear. I speak my words clearly so that people could understand. But still, I think there is a lot of improvement required to make the lasting impression. So I'll work on those in the next 5 6 videos. I'll try to be better and better. So thanks for watching this video. Bye for now.